Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to look at the first two phrases of a Bach Chorale harmonization to see how Bach starts with something that could be fairly straightforward but manages to make it more elaborate and therefore musically much more interesting. So this is chorale number 165 in the Riemenn-Schneider collection. If you want to look at the whole chorale, you don't need to worry about that, but that's only if you want to see the whole chorale. But what you've got in front of you are the first two phrases of this particular chorale harmonization. So let's begin by having a listen to what Bach has done to harmonize a fairly straightforward chorale. So this is the chorale. At one level, you might say it's not an over-captivating melody that Bach has inherited here. So interesting to see and to hear what Bach does in his harmonization to make it sound more interesting. And isn't it great that you start off listening to that rather plain melody thinking, well, it's almost slightly boring, isn't it? And then you hear that harmonization and suddenly the whole thing comes alive. And why does it come alive? Is it the choice of chords? Well, of course, partly that's the case. But really, it's all about the detail of all this quaver movement in the part writing and even some semi-quaver movement. And we're going to have a little look at unpacking that just to see what's going on. But first of all, let's look at the essential harmony that's going on here. Always difficult when you've got lots of repeated notes, isn't it? Any composer will know this. If you've got repeated notes, how do you harmonize them in a way that's interesting? And this begins with these three Fs. And then we have two Cs. Then we go up to D, and then we come back to C. So, okay, it's not over thrilling, is it? Well, let's see what he does. He starts with a tonic chord of F major, that's the home key. And as he crosses that first bar line, he sticks with the same chord, but puts it in first inversion. So even if you're not going to change the chord, changing the inversion is a good tip, isn't it? Root position to first inversion. And then basically he goes on to a chord 4, a B flat major chord. We'll come back and say more about that in due course. And then the third chord of that first complete bar, just to be sure we know which one we're talking about, is this one. That's a dominant seventh in its last inversion. Then we're going back to a tonic chord in first inversion. And then he's using that as a pivot chord to modulate to C major, the dominant key, because then we're going to use a 2/7 chord in C major in first inversion, and then he's going to go 5/1 in C major. So that's all fairly straightforward. The second phrase is going to take us back to F major. So he uses as the first chord of the second phrase, this one here, an A minor chord. Well, that's an interesting pivot because it's chord 6 in C major, but it's chord 3 in F major. So that's the pivot chord. Then he goes on at the beginning of the next line. There's a D minor chord, which is chord 6 in F major. Then we've got chord 5 in first inversion, chord 1, chord 4, which he uses in first inversion and then hops down to a root position. And then a fairly standard cadence that goes 1C, 5, 1. So 1 in second inversion to 5 to 1 with what I call the typical hot cross bun cadence in the bass. Hot cross buns. One thing you might notice about the hot cross buns here is that the cross is very low. It's actually pretty much off the range of the bottom of the bass singing. So it's unusual to find a note as low as that bottom C. As a matter of course, I wouldn't recommend doing it. You do sometimes find D one note higher, very unusual to find C. Why did Bach decide to write a C there? Well, partly musically, the hot cross bun idea, the dominant in the upper octave, followed by the dominant in the lower octave, followed by the tonic in the middle, which is normally the way he does that. So musically, he wants to preserve that. We know some of these chorales were sung. We know that some of them had instrumental support as well. So maybe he's thinking, well, you know, we can have this on the cello at the bottom or something. That'll be absolutely fine. Maybe there just happened to be a bass in town that weekend who could sing a bottom C, so that was good. Or maybe he had a bass with a cold and his voice had dropped a bit, so there we are. Bottom C for the bass with a cold. Who knows? There might be any number of explanations for that, but it's certainly slightly unusual. Okay, let's have a look now at how Bach takes that essential harmonic framework and turns it into something more interesting and much more fluid rhythmically. Well, the anacrusis, that first chord here at the beginning, so this one here, there's your F major chord. Now what happens in the bass and the tenor is that we have passing notes. So that B flat and G that you see in the bass and the tenor at the end of the anacrusis, those notes are dissonant with the chord of F major. They're nothing to do with FAC, but they're moving by step. You see that this is a harmony note, this is a harmony note, this is a harmony note, this is a harmony note. So these are non-harmony notes, they're inessential notes, and they're moving by step. You see how that's a scale movement, this is a scale movement, all moving by step. So these are passing notes, and they're unaccented passing notes because they happen between the beats. So that's the first thing he does, double unaccented passing notes. And notice how effective that is, running in tenths as well. It's nice and clear in the texture. And then at the beginning of the next bar, we've talked about this being an F major chord in first inversion, so there's nothing terribly shocking about that, is there? Going from a root position chord to a first inversion chord, that's fine. But notice this little touch. What Bach does is something rather nice in the alto part here, because that D is a passing note again. It's nothing to do with the F major chord, but then he goes on to E flat. Now we're not really expecting E flat because we're in the key of F major. What's E flat doing there? Well, E flat would be sort of pushing us towards B flat major, wouldn't it? Well, that's interesting because if this is a chord of F major, and by having E flat, we're thinking B flat major, well, the next chord is really a B flat major chord. Okay, now B flat major is chord 4 in the home key of F major, but we've also now got this sense of going 5/7 in first inversion to 1 in the key of B flat major. So he's going 5/7 to 1 in B flat major, then carrying on in F major for a while, which means that this is a secondary dominant. So here's our secondary dominant into B flat, and that E flat in the alto is just beautiful, isn't it? We're not expecting it, but it's a lovely singable line. E flat, just giving us some colour we're not really expecting. Then, what does Bach do on the next beat? Well, having had that lovely colour with the E flat, you're expecting the E flat to move on to a D. So we hear a chord of B flat major. What does Bach do? He turns this E flat into this E flat here into a suspension. So he prepares the suspension there, he sounds it there, resolves it there. So prepare, sound, resolve. That's what we expect a suspension to do. And the E flat to D is a fourth to a third above that bass note. So it's a 4/3 suspension. So having tucked in the E flat as a little bit of a surprise, he then says, let's have a 4/3 suspension. So that's a kind of double enrichment, isn't it? First of all, the E flat, then the 4/3 suspension. Isn't that gorgeous? And then in the tenor, just after all that, he just has this passing note. So we have this A as a passing note between the B and the B flat and the G that are harmony notes. So it's a gorgeous moment. And then we've talked about this chord, the third beat of the bar here, being a dominant seventh in its last inversion. Now, Bach loves to do this. He loves his dominant sevenths, but he particularly loves them in their last inversion. There's kind of a real kind of power about that. You're dying for that B flat in the bass to resolve, which it does on the next chord. So there's a wonderful kind of loading of that. But the point is, when you look at this whole bar, can you see how these things all kind of combine? So you've got this passing note in the alto after these double passing notes here. You've got this E flat pushing us into B flat major. You've got this 4/3 suspension. You've got a little passing note here. You've then got a 5/7 chord in its last inversion. And Bach throws all this stuff together. So it's really rich. So all of those things are happening in such a short space of time. Well, okay, if this is our 5/7 in last inversion, what happens next? Well, that all resolves onto chord 1 in root position. Okay, now what happens at the end of that bar? Well, there's what looks like a passing note in the bass, but that E in the alto is a little bit difficult to justify as an inessential note. The main reason being is this leap here. So these inessential notes tend to go by step. So what's all that about? Well, really, it's a change of harmony, isn't it? You've got an F major chord, then it becomes a C major chord there. This is all part of this preparation for a modulation to C major when we get a chord 2/7 in its first inversion. You see this tied note in the tenor across the bar line and you think, I wonder if that's a suspension, but it isn't. It's just a harmony note. But this 2/7 in first inversion, Bach uses that chord so much. 2/7B, 5/1. So 2/7 first inversion, 5/1. There are so many cadences in Bach that do that. It's well worth getting hold of as a formula, if you like. But it's lovely how he comes out of F major, having already been through B flat major, comes out of F major and then just tucks us into C major for the cadence. So the whole of that first phrase. And then we arrive on that C major chord quite innocently after all that. Isn't it wonderful? Okay, well, we go on to the second phrase. Having had that C major chord, the A minor chord is slightly unexpected actually, isn't it? But you hear that contrast between the major chord and the minor chord. It's pushing us into a new place for the start of the new phrase, isn't it? But as we've said, it's a pivot because it's chord 6 in C major, chord 3 in F major. As we go on to the next line, it seems perfectly reasonable that we've got a D minor chord here, which, as we've said, is 6 in F major. But notice what's happening in the alto. We've got a suspension. It's prepared there, it's sounded here, it's resolved here. So this is a D minor chord, so A minor, D minor, but we're suspending the E in the alto, so we get E, D. Lovely crunch of that E going to D. Oh, isn't it wonderful? You could live with these suspensions, couldn't you? It's like a glorious tasting chocolate bar. Sorry, I'm not allowed to eat those anymore since my diet. Anyway, never mind. Here's a 9/8 suspension. It's the nearest thing I'm going to get to a chocolate fix today. Well, there we are. But it just makes that moment all the more glorious. Instead of A minor, D minor, A minor, then a 9/8. You hear how effective that is. And how we prepare with a note that belongs to the chord. We continue that note, so P becomes S. That's the dissonant note. It then resolves by step, usually downwards, as it does here. And we get this little crunch out of the suspension. Okay, so you think, well, well done, Bach. You've got a nice suspension in there. That's great. And then perhaps we're just going to go on to an ordinary C major chord. Not if your name is Johann Sebastian Bach. What he does now, he says, this D in the alto is the resolution of one suspension, but it's also the preparation of the next. Aha! So this becomes the preparation of the next one. It's still sounding here, then it resolves here. So this is a 7, 6 above this bass note. So you see how we have one suspension, and the resolution of the first suspension becomes also the preparation of the next suspension. So we get these two suspensions back to back. That's gorgeous, isn't it? Lovely stuff. You can't have too many suspensions. Then we have an ordinary chord of F major. Now we've got a passing note in the bass here. It's passing by step. It's off the beat, so it's unaccented. And then we've got these passing notes in the alto going on at the same time. So bass and alto using passing notes in contramotion. That's a nice combination, isn't it? And it's keeping the rhythm flowing. We're using those semiquavers that we've had before, so that becomes a figure that gets used several times. But we're also elaborating in a way that's not using suspensions. So we didn't have suspensions in the first phrase, apart from the one that we talked about in the alto part there. Now we've had two suspensions back to back, so now we're having decoration without suspensions. Onto our chord 4. And then at the end of this bar, you notice, Bach keeps the quaver movement going, but all it does is hop from one inversion to another. So we go from first inversion to root position in B flat there, and that keeps the movement going, but we're not really decorating other than some movement to a different place in the harmony. Then we have this chord 1 in second inversion, but notice he has this decoration in the alto. Notice if you think about this above the bass, it's going 4, 3, 2, 3. So instead of just sitting on this chord and then moving to this chord, how can you decorate that kind of move? Well, notice how he does it. 4, 3, 2, 3. And it keeps those two semiquavers that we've heard earlier, gives us a bit of movement. And then as he comes into the cadence here, well, what's happening around this point? Well, essentially, as we said earlier, it's a perfect cadence, 5, 1. In the soprano, this is an anticipatory note. So the soprano really should be G, F, but he's anticipating that final F. So, and then notice he does this as well. He tucks in a passing note in the tenor that happens to make the 5 into a 5-7. So we get chord 5, an anticipatory note, a passing note that turns that 5 into a 5-7 before the final resolution to chord 1. So you start with something that could be rather plain, rather bland, and you end up with this beautifully rich harmonization that works absolutely brilliantly by this kind of combination of elaboration. So we end up with the finished article sounding like this. Just gorgeous, isn't it? It has a kind of simplicity about it at one level, but when you just dig into what's going on and analyse, you see how clever the whole thing is. But the musical result is sheer beauty, isn't it? Well, if you've enjoyed this video, you might want to go to our website at www.mmcourses.co.uk. You'll even find there an online course in how to write and how to harmonise a Bach chorale. So if this is something you're engaged in, well, you might want to look at that course. There's also advanced theory, which is really getting into the depths of harmony and how to deal with that, as well as analysis and melody writing and other things as well. Many other courses, aural dictation, keyboard harmony, orchestration, analysis courses, all sorts of things that may be of interest. So have a look at that. While you're on the homepage, just have a click on Maestros as well, and that will tell you all about our wonderful Maestros group, which is a global community of musicians. There are lots of perks if you want to become a maestro. At level 1, it's a kind of support level where you can just help support the work of our channel. If you want to move on to levels 2, level 3, you get discounts on our courses and access to our monthly live streams, which are wonderful events. Lots of teaching input from me there where we can go into much more detail over a longer period. Personal one-to-one feedback on your compositions, arrangements, harmony, performances, whatever you want to submit there. And a live chat, meaning that you can interact with other members of this fantastic group. So that might be of interest to you as well.